For Hashkiveinu, our prayer asking for God's divine shelter of peace, Sukkot Shalom, that comes next, I'd like to try together something a little bit different this time. And you can find it on the next page of our handouts, the page that has the three columns here, one for English, one for Hebrew and English letters transliteration, and one for the original Hebrew. The Reform movement has the celebrated principle choice through knowledge, codified in such moments as the 1976 Reform movement platform, in which we each exercise our individual autonomy with God choosing, and but also, it's one of these things where like the whole phrase is in your head, but you got to find where it is. We confront the claims of Jewish tradition and exercise our autonomy, choosing and creating on the basis of commitment and knowledge. That's a beautiful principle. And of course, one of the Achilles' heels or risks would be that one person's choice through knowledge, for example, if they're the ones editing the prayer book, the Siddur, runs the risk of becoming another person's dogma if all that happens is you're handed a book and said, because I said so. I think it's important to have the chance to explore together a little bit of the whys behind what some of the leaders of Reform Judaism are doing and why, and to look at some of the different choices that we could make if we wish to. So let's explore that together a little bit tonight in regard to Hashkiveinu, and this will actually be my divrei Torah for the night. I think it's a nice opportunity to really immerse in this moment in the liturgy, because again, this is where we express our yearning for the divine shelter of peace, Sukkot Shalom. And Lord knows, literally and figuratively, we are yearning for the shelter of peace, Sukkot Shalom, on many different levels, personally and in our society and our world. So there's a couple of things that I've done here in this version in our handout that are a bit different from what's in the Reform movement's prayer book, Mishkan Tefillah, from 2007. One, you'll see here that at the bottom, I've added the expression that is being added more and more to various parts of the liturgy these days, which is praying for all who dwell on earth, Kol Yoshvei Tevel. And this is an opportunity, using this phrase, to take the prayers that are already in the liturgy that are praying for the Jewish people or for Israel in the sense of the Jewish people as a poetic term for the Jewish people, and to say that we're extending our prayers outward to all who dwell on earth. In some ways, this is a novel liturgical innovation. You'll see it added more and more to Oseh Shalom, where we're going to start doing that, as we'll get to a little later after the Amidah. Sometimes it's added at the end of Kaddish. But the truth is, like many of the most festive and meaningful innovations, it actually draws on values that have been a part of the tradition all along. I think that it's very beautiful that Judaism has the genius to say both and not either or. That we can express our prayers for the well-being of the Jewish family and the human family. That we can have our identity be a part of both the Jewish family and the human family. It doesn't have to be either or. And we see this throughout our liturgy. So for example, if you'll turn with me back to page 16, one of the Psalms of Kabbalah Shabbat, we didn't sing it this time, but we might very well a future time. You'll see here, we're talking about how we're so grateful to God for creating creation, right? Let the sea and all within it thunder, right? The oceans, of course, cover the globe. The world and its inhabitants, that's everyone. And if you look in the Hebrew or the transliteration, 6 lines down from the top, Tevel v'yoshvei va, the world, and those who dwell within it. That's everybody, right? The one infinite divine presence, according to how we each interpret that brought all of this creation into being, all the world, all of time, gave each of us the chance to be alive. That's a gift we all benefit from, and it makes us on some level all part of one family. We see it again in Aleinu, not the part we usually sing, although again, I think we should at least consider changing that, because this is a very fun and beautiful and meaningful part of the poetry. If you'll turn with me to page 284 at the bottom, you'll see here we're talking about what we hope for from God and from the future. And you'll see here 3 lines up from the bottom in the Hebrew, L'takein olam to repair the world. Verb form, same as the noun tikkun olam, repair of the world. B'malchut Shaddai, in the sovereignty of God. And what's going to happen when we engage in this repair of the world? Who all is going to be embraced in this more peaceful future? Turn the page with me to 286 at the top. Kol yoshvei tevel, all who dwell on earth. There it is again, right? And the number of verses in the full Hebrew Bible, including the prophets and the writings, the Tanakh, that evoke this kind of universalism, it says something about the Tanakh that there are so many verses that evoke these values. I had a hard time choosing which ones to cite for us tonight. I won't be able to get through them all because at some point we got to go home. But that says something about Jewish values, right? So, for example, in Isaiah chapter 19, we see this incredible vision of what the future can look like, where the prophet Isaiah writes, "For Adonai will make God's self known to the Egyptians." Not, twist in the story, not who you were potentially expecting were gonna, be part of the utopian future, but we're all human beings here. "And the Egyptians shall acknowledge Adonai in that day." In the sense of, doesn't mean that everybody has to be Jews. That's not how Judaism looks at it. Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. But in the sense of the encounter with God that Noach has. Noach as the reprogenitor of all of the earth, right? Encountering the oneness of the divine presence, that therefore we should not murder because we are all created in the image of God, etc., etc. So the Lord will heal the Egyptians, Isaiah says. "In that day there shall be a highway from Egypt to Assyria." These are all rival peoples of the ancient world. "The Assyrians shall join with the Egyptians, and together shall serve Adonai." It's extraordinary. "In that day Israel will be a third partner with Egypt and Assyria as a blessing on earth." A radical vision then, and still a radical vision now. "For Adonai of forces will bless them, saying, Blessed be my people Egypt, Ami Mitzrayim, my handiwork Assyria, and my heritage Israel." Right? If you were expecting my people to be followed by not Egypt, then I think we have the experience of surprise that is the literary and the spiritual payoff of that moment. Because, of course, we're all God's peoples. We're all created in the image of God. If you want to hear some more verses of that nature, come up to me afterward. Maybe we'll have a class on it one day. But that's the concept. Isaiah certainly hums us a few bars, and we can pause that note there, I think. The second thing that I'd love for us to turn to together tonight is that if you look with me here in the second stanza, they're not stanzas in the original, but I thought it would be a little more clear to break it up that way, of Hashkiveinu, you'll see here, this is a phrase that that Reform Judaism's liturgy deletes, and I've added it back for us to play with and to find inspiration and validation from. And the phrase here is, we're pouring out our yearnings to the divine, right, for what we yearn for. "And shield us and support us, and keep away from us any foe, plague, and sword, and hunger, and sorrow." That's all in the Reform liturgy. "And keep away any adversary from in front of us and behind us." And the Hebrew word, the original Hebrew word here that can be translated as adversary is in fact Satan. Now, this is not what we often picture in the West as a red cartoon character with a big pitchfork. And it certainly is not the concept that one might encounter in Christianity or in European traditions or other things of this nature. And it doesn't have to be a character one literalistically believes exists. But I think what's so powerful about the way that our ancestors imagined the figure of Satan is that in the Tanakh, in the full Hebrew Bible, including the prophets and the writings, Satan is a way that our ancestors imagined and evoked and gave a name to the forces of greed, of false accusation, of distortion, of deceit, and of incitement against each other. It has some common DNA with Buddhism's notion of the three poisons, being hatred, greed, and delusion. For anyone who may be curious about the direction in which that goes, I recommend the work of the meditation teacher John Kabat-Zinn, whose expertise is in the natural sciences, and therefore he's not approaching it in a religious sense. He would say one can learn from Buddha without being Buddhist, the same way one can learn from Galileo without being Italian. And I think that our ancestors, in the figure of Satan, gave a name to the fact that these forces ultimately really exist in the human condition. They exist in the human condition, and it's important to have a language for talking about that. And it doesn't mean we should have some conception of blame and shame and all sorts of things like that. We say in Jewish tradition, my God, the soul you placed in me is pure. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahorahi. We are pure people. We also, as human beings, have a lot of power. I mean, opposable thumbs? Check that out. Eat your heart out, bunnies. We've got awareness, consciousness, unbelievable things human beings can do. But that means we have to make choices rightly and wisely. And Jewish tradition teaches that each of us has within us the good inclination and the evil inclination, and we have to answer the call of the good. So, for example, and again, I'll do sort of the elevator ride length version of this story, but there's a story in the Tanakh that King David is taking a census. And it's clear from the context that this is a census because David wants to know how many subjects he has so he can feel, self-congratulatory about how important he is. It's not a practical census for governance. And the text says, and Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to number Israel. And so what is this supposed to mean? Again, it's not a cartoon character with a red pitchfork. The great commentator Radak of medieval Occitania in the south of France, he interprets, what does Satan mean? It means, he says, the instinct that is planted in the human heart, right? The instinct of being self-aggrandizing, the instinct of being in it for bragging rights, as opposed to mutual respect and love. I think that our tradition is giving us a vocabulary for talking about that. We see in the book of Job, for example, that Satan says to God, I have been floating around in the earth and walking about within it, right? This dialogue is, I believe the technical Talmudic term would be creepy, right? I was sharing with my sister, who's a fiction writer, how I feel that this so much describes some of the forces we see in our own time. And my sister says, yeah, could really do with a little less floating around. But that's because the instincts of self-aggrandizement and false accusation are floating around within the human condition. God says to Satan, have you seen my servant Job? What a good person he is. There's none like him. And Satan says, well, that's because you've given him everything you wanted. He wanted. If you were to strike him with bad fortune, he would curse you in a heartbeat. What a horrible thing to say, right? The distortion, the degradation. And so I think Jewish tradition gives us a vocabulary for talking about these forces and for expressing our yearning to be safe from those who would act out of self-aggrandizement or false accusations. And just as we express our yearning to be safe from those who would do so, so too, when we say these words, it's a reminder to ourselves to make sure to keep these instincts in the human condition at bay and to keep them in check so that we can make choices rightfully to others, just as we want them to do for ourselves. Just briefly, I'll add here that at the top of the page, I've restored the traditional word here where we say, lay us down, eternal one, our God, in peace, and stand us up, our sovereign, Malkeinu, to life. The current day Reform liturgy changes sovereign, Malkeinu, to guardian, Shomreinu. I think it might be nice to experiment with going back to sovereign, because I think, again, not like a cartoon character of God as a king with a big white beard on a throne, but the idea, I think, that no matter what human power may be enjoying power in any current moment, no matter what the status quo may be, no matter what we see in our world at the moment, I think what our tradition is saying is there is something more fundamental than that. There is a fundamental power of justice, a power of goodness, more fundamental than the here and now, more fundamental than any challenge, however challenging it may be. And that's the divine presence according to what that means for each of us. Well, one way to describe it would be Dr. King's famous line, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." I think there's something empowering about saying that source of justice and goodness that's deeper than any given human power, that's deeper than any status quo, that's a force that we can tap into. And that's a force we can draw on to help us get to a better place, because that's something we can do together. And that itself helps to bring the divine shelter of peace, Sukkot Shalom, closer and closer to earth. So in this spirit, let's read together here in the English text, and then let's sing a little bit. And from there, we'll go into our Amidah. So please join me here. Lay us down in the English. Lay us down, eternal one, our God, in peace, and stand us up, our sovereign, to life, and spread out over us the shelter of your peace, and guide us in good counsel in your presence, and rescue us because of who you are, and shield us and support us, and keep away from us any foe, plague, and sword, and hunger, and sorrow, and keep away any adversary from in front of us and behind us. And in the shade of your wings gather us, for you are a God who watches over us and keeps us safe. For you are a sovereign God who is gracious and compassionate. And watch over our going out and our coming in, for life and for peace, from now and ever onward, and spread out over us the shelter of your peace. Blessed are you, eternal one, who spreads out a shelter of peace over us, over all our people, Yisrael, and over Yerushalayim, and over all who dwell on earth. And let us say Amen.